Well, we're here, and thanks to Tia Levon, Hill, and Greg Borowski in advance, who are going to lead today's conversation. This is something I've been looking forward to, and it's the next in a series of things we'll do as the two groups, Future Focus and Rising Leaders, where we're just thinking about leadership from a number of different perspectives. And so today we're going to hear from Tia Levon's going to interview Greg about his experience becoming a long distance runner, a marathoner, and what lessons to take from that in terms of being a manager and a leader. And so I think there's some interesting analogies that are going to course through this. Feel free to jump in with questions and comments along the way. And in the meantime, Tia Levon, I'll hand it to you to run the show.
All right. Thank you so much. I do appreciate that. And I can't see anyone but this presentation, by the way. So just know that you got to tell me something if you want to chime in or anything like that. But Greg and I have cooked up quite a presentation. I will give you a spoiler alert. It is filled with quite a few good gems that you'll be able to carry with you into your day-to-day. So let's go ahead and get started. Before we actually jump into what we've laid out for today, I thought it'd be good for Greg, if you want to just go ahead and give, a little synopsis of your title, your role and how long you've been in that role, and a little bit about your newsroom, just as background information for those who may not know.
Sure, happy to do that, and good afternoon for everybody. I made it past noon in most time zones anyways. So I'm Greg Borowski. I'm the deputy editor for news projects and investigations at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. It's my hometown newspaper. I grew up in Milwaukee, went to Marquette University, started out actually in Gannett. Before I wasn't in Gannett, I was at the Marion, Indiana newspaper, which was part of the company at the time, and then Lansing, Michigan for 6 years, covering state government and politics. I came home to Milwaukee, covered City Hall for just about 10 years and political things, and then became an editor, first on the Metro desk as our enterprise editor, and then became our projects and investigative editor. And more recently, I've taken on the deputy editor role, which is essentially in our newsroom the managing editor position, in that I oversee our news and business operations, and with that have some responsibilities in regard to the other 10 Gannett newspapers in the state, specifically where we're trying to integrate our newsrooms in a more cohesive manner. So we try to view it as a single Wisconsin newsroom. And then, do you want me to mention where running comes into this, or do you have a different question in mind?
Well, you actually beat me to it. Okay. I was going to say, go ahead and let us know when, and most importantly, why did you start running?
Yeah, I would say I would never have envisioned myself as a runner or thought of myself that way. Back in high school, ran track for a couple years. Had at different points throughout my life would, do a little bit of running to get into shape or whatnot. And I really started doing it more seriously just over 5 years ago, when I had joined a local gym and felt like I was doing well with the workouts, but you can only do so many boot camp workouts in a week before your body just can't, lift another kettlebell. And so then I said, well, let's try to do something on other days. And I joined a 10K program the gym had, ran that, and felt like, okay, I can do that. It's 6.2 miles. But after that, a friend of mine in the group, we just looked at it and said, let's try to, if we can do 6 miles, we can probably do a 15K, which would be 9.3. And then we ran some in that fall, that a little bit longer. And then both of us one day were watching the Lakefront Marathon in Milwaukee. We had been driving through the area and saw runners, and both were like, boy, that would be really cool. I wonder if we could make it that far a year later. And that's what set our mind toward the question of, could we train for a marathon? And then that sort of took me down the the running rabbit hole, so to speak, where you have to start to learn a lot more about it, and learn how to tackle something like that, which I know we've got some of that we want to talk about today. But I did want to just throw out at the start, because I think it's important for this group, just the idea that if you run, you're a runner. And I say that in the sense that early on people would say to me, like, when did you become a runner? And I'm like, I'm not a runner. I'm just getting exercise, or I'm just monkeying around and doing this to, lose a little weight and get into better shape. But for this purpose, when I think of it and reflect on the idea that, you may have in your mind image of what a runner looks like, or how a runner, what their life is like, or how they pursue things. And it's easy to, as a manager or a leader, to say, well, I don't fit that image that I have, or you sort of have this imposter syndrome of like, I'm not really a leader, or I'm not really a manager, I'm just doing this stuff. So it's important, I think, to just get to the basics of, if you run, you're a runner. If you lead, you're a leader. Now, that doesn't mean you're a perfect leader or a perfect runner, or there isn't more to learn, but it helps get past that mindset where, if you have any of that imposter syndrome type thing, or I don't see myself doing that because everybody I've seen looks a certain way, or has a certain background, or functions in a certain way, that's been the first thing you really want to let go of before we, move on to anything beyond that.
Yeah. And that's a great point. Absolutely. I think a lot of people on this call can relate to that. And how many marathons do you have now under your belt?
I have done 6 of them now. The first one, like anyone who runs a marathon, I'll tell you, at about mile 18 or 19, you've retired from marathoning, and you just want to scrape your way to the end. And then about an hour or two afterwards, you kind of go, boy, I could do that again. And you do that at every marathon pretty much. But I've done 6 over the last 4.5 years or so. And I'm signed up for a 7th this summer.
Well, let's say you've got like 7 more than I've done. So, uh, well, after speaking with you, one thing I found very um, interesting was the teamwork aspect. Because when you think about running, you think it's such a solitary thing. So let's touch on this first phase that we're going to go into here, which is that you don't get there on your own. Let's talk about the importance of teamwork.
Yeah, that's a really good observation and point to focus on, because, I mean, in many ways, management can feel the same way. I mean, especially the further up the kind of the hierarchy you go, and that you have fewer peers, certainly maybe fewer peers in your newsroom, and you may feel like, well, I'm the only person who has this to worry about, and you sort of get into this tunnel vision mindset of, this is only me and it's on me alone. Even as a runner, I mean, obviously, it's not like I can hand off the miles that I'm going to run and have someone else run them, but what has grown up and what's helped kept me going on this is a group of folks we call the Bayview Run Group, and for the neighborhood we live in, where we, it'd be rare for any of those folks to be out running alone. I mean, just because when you're with a group, you've got a better support system, you've got knowledge of people who are just maybe have run a little bit longer or have different perspective on things. And that teamwork, extends to your family, people who are supporting you, who are making the time for you to pursue these different things. It might be coaches at the gym you go to because you have to cross train and not strictly run. But I mean, that was an early on thing, because sometimes people tell me, I could never be a runner because you're always out there by yourself and that's all you're doing, and it's just too boring. And it's like, well, it's only boring if you make it that way, or if you want to be that solo person who just logs the miles on their own. There's times when that's important, when you want to set aside and just clear your head and run. But other times, you're really going to get pulled through by working with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't think that, I guess that more so also plays a part in your training. and the support that comes through there, and that helps you get to that finish line. So talk a little bit about you talk about when we say teamwork, we talk about, communication, and sacrifices along with the support. Can you touch on those aspects?
Yeah, I mean, and taking this more directly into a newsroom environment now, I mean, as a manager or a leader, you have to, I think, carry yourself and present things that you do in a way that people understand it is a team effort and a team process. And a lot of that is to communicate with people to know what they're interested in, what their strengths are they comfortable with what you're asking them to do, and so forth. And it's one example here that for people who've worked with me when I was focused more directly on editing pretty much all of our projects here, I would always say projects are a team sport. And it sort of took it out of this idea that sometimes people think in journalism, the project, the long story is the reporter who, goes off by him or herself and works, and then they pop up 6 months later with this great story, and then it goes in the newspaper, where to make an effective effort, you really need the photojournalists involved and the graphic artists involved and the copy editors and the social media folks, and that's the same sort of thing, that if you're at the center of that as a leader, you need to sort of understand what everybody else is capable of doing, when you can push them and stretch them further, and how things are progressing. And that's where that communication is so important, that and that takes place not just in meetings, but somebody you bump into in the hallway or emails, and you just you have to learn how to read the room, so that you know when there's a problem that's going to emerge, or you can see this thing coming down the pike that you need to head off and kind of guide in a better direction.
Yeah, and all of this really brings me into our next point, which is about working toward a long-term goal. I mean, all of us here are very familiar with goal setting, whether it's more immediate or whether it's long-term. So one thing you mentioned in our conversation, is that you often tell yourself to run the mile you're in. Can you talk a little bit about that in regards to working toward a long-term goal in the newsroom, or one that you set while you're running?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of ways to think about that. And the way I usually do is, specifically in a marathon context or something that's going to take a long time, that it's easy to look ahead and worry and say, well, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? Or to look back and feel like with regret about something that you didn't do properly. And the idea on that is you have to focus and be centered around what you're working on in the moment and what's in front of you at that time. So if you're running a marathon and I'm at mile 7 and I'm worried about mile 18 because I know there's a giant ass hill in mile 18, I'm off that center, and it probably means I'm not going to run the mile I'm in as well. And similarly, if you're having a good mile, you don't have to be worried like, oh my gosh, it's, how can I keep this up? I mean, just stay centered on what you're focused on, because as managers, you have a lot of things coming at you at different points, and sometimes you can get lost in the kind of the rush of different things that are needed, and start worrying about, well, how will I ever get that done? And you're going to get it done. You're going to get mile 17 done by running miles 1 through 16, and then you're going to run mile 17. You don't have to run mile 17 if you're on mile 6.
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice. Great advice. And moving along, also another gem, and I'm telling you, this whole presentation is filled with them. Is sometimes you have to single task it, especially in regards to management. Can you break that down a little bit for us, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, um, I mentioned before, there's just sometimes just a million things going, and sometimes I find myself at the end of the day with, 10 things on my plate that each require about 5 minutes of focused time to do, and I just can't get them done because you're being interrupted, something else comes up, a new emergency, some other fire to put out. And there's just the importance of at times to just say, okay, I'm going to shut this other stuff out and zero in on this one thing to make sure it's done, done right. And it's sort of like in a running context of, sometimes you've got a million things going on and you go, I don't have time to go get this run in, however important it is. And if you do, you're going to feel better off that you did, and it's probably going to help you with other things, down the line. So it's not a case where you have to feel like, well, if I really just focus on this for half an hour, I'm neglecting other things. What it's doing is kind of clearing your head of things, so that when you get to those next things, you're better able to focus on them too. Because if your day is a jumble with all these things you're trying to address at the same time, and in this Teams world we're in, you can get your messages, you can work on the side and do all these different things, and it's just hard to do your best work if your mind is in multiple places at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. Prioritizing um, is now more important than ever, especially in the virtual world, which brings so much at like to your fingertips. And in the news world, which is where we all are, um, it's so easy to want that fast progress, that fast goal, achievement. And I thought it was a really, really good point that you made about slow progress still being progress, and it's something that we need to acknowledge. Can you touch on that for me?
Yeah, there's actually an interesting not even a school of thought, an interesting approach in running that is, and with longer distances and marathons, that you have to run slow in order to run fast. And that is that if you're always trying to go at marathon pace or whatever your 5K or 10K pace is, you're better off just getting the miles in. In this case, I usually think of it though as, you know, you got 26.2 miles to do, as a for instance, and I'll cite an example. And I ran the Chicago Marathon last October, and it was my worst time ever. It was the worst conditions ever that I've run in. There were, 70 plus degrees at 7 in the morning, 85% humidity. They had red flagged the race, which was a step away from canceling it. It means dangerous conditions, and you just felt like I'm just not making progress. But over time, you realize you sort of start to count down the mile markers and things and realize you're still making progress. And that becomes an important thing from a management and leadership perspective, in that, there's often, you have an idea in your head, this is how quickly this is going to go, or this is so easy for this to be done. I don't understand why people don't see that, or why it can't be done. And you really have to stop and first think, if you're making any progress, that's still something. And it also may prompt you to look at it and say, okay, why is it that it's not going as fast as I want? Put it on yourself. Did you not communicate well enough what you wanted? Are there some structural issues that are impeding progress? Do you not have the right people at the table? Was it a goal that was too ambitious? So it's sort of like, it hopefully prompts you to reflect a bit and sort those things out, but it's still progress. So it's like, if your goal is, we got to double our digital circulation this year, digital subscriptions, and you didn't get there all in one swoop, did you get partway there? That's still something, and it's not to be minimized, because that's still progress, even if it didn't go as fast or as smoothly as you might have hoped.
Yeah, and I know for those of us who are perfectionists and a bit hard on ourselves, that's hard to hear and hard to take in, but it is a fact. Whether it's slow progress, fast progress, progress is progress, and it should definitely be recognized. So again, we have our long-term goals that we work towards, but I think one of the another one of the most important things that we talked about is setting attainable goals. Just thinking in some of the life experiences that I've had, as far as, setting goals that may have been quite ambitious, in theory at the beginning, when really you need to really set the floor and set the tone for your goals and think about, these, like you said, attainable goals. Touch on the importance of this in regards to your marathon running, as well as how this translates to your role in the newsroom.
Yeah, well, I would say, just to note a couple of the things on the screen here. First, I mean, sometimes the goals you set, I mean, this is sort of, may not seem attainable in the moment. So I said, I'm going to run a marathon. And it's like, well, obviously I wasn't going to run it that day or even that next week or a month later. But if you look at it and say, this is a goal I know I can get to if I have the right plan and the right strategy to get there and to follow through on that. So what I did when I ran my first marathon, I started training with the friend that I had mentioned, because she was going to run it as well. And then she got injured along the way and couldn't do it. But I kept up with that plan of certain mileage, markers to attain on different days of the week, to build in some rest days so that you can continue to perform well when you are performing and running, to build in the cross training and other things you have to do. And that's sort of like it. It's fine to say, okay, I'm going to double our digital circulation, but how? You need a plan. You can't, ask your teammates or team members to follow if you don't know at least roughly how you're going to get there. And that doesn't mean, to the second pointer, that you don't vary it when the time comes. I mean, I often in the course of this training plan, and I love to print it out and check off each day that I go through, because it feels like you've made some progress. That there may be a day where it's like you just can't run that distance, or you can't run whatever pace is prescribed on that day. And that's when you can stop and think about, okay, is there something else I can do? What if I flip-flop these days to make it work? What are there different things within that plan that, something came together faster than you thought, and you can slow down on something and shift your attention elsewhere. So you've got to be really flexible in regards to what you're doing. And then I would just note too that the importance of rest and burnout. You can, for a marathon, you can overtrain easily. They say sometimes the hardest part of the marathon is getting to the start line, not getting to the finish line, because of all the miles you have to put in and to get there. So you have to build in time where you can rest and you can pause. And in more of a management context, that might mean, when does your team get to stop and take a day off, or stop and celebrate some milestone that you already achieved, or build in some opportunities for yourself as well, because it's easy to burn out as a manager if you're 100% on going all the time. And then you can burn out your team in the same way you can overtrain. You can overmanage, I guess is what I'm saying too, is that you have to be able to give people some room to work, to develop their own skills, to see what they can do and grow. But that's something that's in a running plan like this is always built in. And I have a friend who did 2 marathons last year, and she's qualified for Boston, and she finished 1 marathon. She did the Nashville Marathon, and she ran like 10 straight days. And I said, you can't. Why are you doing that? You need your time for your body to recover. And she said, I just feel the best each day when I'm running. And I said, well, what happens if you get injured? And then you're going to lose out on that. And lo and behold, she's injured now and losing out on that. So that's sort of where you have to, pace yourself and be smart about how you're performing and what you're asking your team members to do.
Yeah. And I have here pivoting in COVID, because of course we all had goals, prior to the introduction of COVID, and COVID definitely changed a lot of those goals. And like you said, being willing to vary it. That for those who that doesn't come easy to, that had to be learned to pivot in regard to COVID. I mean, and also in relation, like you said, to rest and burnout. You know, being able to work virtually is kind of also blurred the office hours and the lines of when things may be a bit much. Can you talk about how you've pivoted in during this pandemic, in regards again to the marathon running and how this translates into the newsroom?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing to think about on that is that you never know what to expect, right? And whatever plan you had, so if we rolled back the clock 2 years ago, we had an entirely different plan for how 2020 was going to go here in Milwaukee at the Journal Sentinel than how it came up and how it wound up. And as you all recall, entering into COVID, it was like, well, we'll social distance for a few weeks or a month or whatever, and here we are 2 years later, and not back to the way it was. So you have to, as a manager, it everything becomes kind of a balancing act, I think, in that you and your role are able to see the bigger picture than anyone else of the people you're supervising or working with, and you have to recognize, what's the long range goal, what's a way to help us get there, what's a reasonable thing to do in the short term. And COVID, I think, has really reminded us constantly that you don't know what's ahead, and you have to be willing and prepared that it may be a new opportunity that comes up that you hadn't thought of, and let's move toward it because you have a new opening. It could be a new challenge that comes up. It could be all sorts of things, and sometimes it's good to know what's ahead. Sometimes you simply don't.
Yeah.
And
Oh, and that's perfect. That leads me into my next point, which is planning ahead. And during this time, I wanted you to share with us a little bit about, of course, you've touched on this a little bit throughout so far, but the importance of training and really honing in on a certain kind of mindset while planning ahead, because it all starts in the planning, and to reach any goal, it'll take that training. So you have so much more expertise in regards to training with your marathon running. Can you touch on that a little bit?
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of thoughts and things that apply here. I mean, as I said earlier, I mean, if you set a goal to run a marathon, you don't have to run it today. It's going to be in the distance, and there's a certain approach and steps you have to take in order to get there. And it's not like you could say, if you run, you don't want to run, well, let me just run 15 miles a day as my long run is 15 miles every week, and then I'll do 26. I mean, you probably can, but that's not going to be the best way to get there. So you have to really think about, the strategy comes into play of how you're going to do it. You have to have this mindset that you're going to do it and get it done, and to recognize that there's going to be a lot of hurdles and things along the way. There's going to be some runs that just probably suck and you're not feeling the greatest that day, and there are other runs that are feeling, you're feeling particularly strong. But you have to have that mindset that I'm going to do this work. That's why when I check these boxes off on this plan on the calendar, it's like it's telling me that I've put in the work. And some of that gets to, there aren't a lot of shortcuts, in training for a marathon or in management. It's not like you can say, I'm just gonna, those weeks with the long runs that are 20 miles, I'm not gonna do those, because it's not going to be as effective. You can't, shortcut your way through a lot of the key things in management either. You have to pay attention to every one of the details. You have to, do all the work, whether that's, talking directly with reporters and editors on goals and their expectations. You have to build it out. And then, and I realize I might be jumping around a little bit because I'm just seeing both of these on the screen and they're so related that, a piece of advice that people running marathons often get are to have an A, B, and a C goal. And that's because if your A goal is, you're going to meet a certain time, and that's the goal for, you're feeling great, you're not injured at all, the weather's perfect, everything is going great. But you're bound to have happen in the marathon things where, your body feels it differently, or different things happen, and you need some sort of backup goals to say, okay, my B goal is, I'm going to, run the whole thing without stopping, or my C goal is, whatever that you've set up, because when you're in the midst of it, if that first goal goes away, you still have other things to shoot for. And I will say on my first marathon, I was shooting to get in sub 4 hours, so under 4 hours, and I was well on pace for that till about the 20-mile mark, and I suddenly got really like Charlie horse style stabbing kind of cramps in both calves, and that goal pretty much went out the window, and I've ended up at like 4:03 or something like that. And it killed me later because it was like, if only one of these things, I would have to run and stop and stretch them out and run some more and stop and stretch them out. And it's like, oh, if only one of these times, if only I had to stop, 7 times instead of 8 times or whatever, I could have made it through. But my other goals were, I was going to enjoy this experience because it was the first time, and that I was going to finish the marathon. And it kind of goes back to that idea at the beginning of, if you run, you're a runner. It's like, the joke of like, what do you call the person who finishes last in his medical school class? And the answer is doctor. And, you still count the person who finishes that marathon as a marathoner. I mean, it's not like you go, you don't get an asterisk by it. So it's sort of, I guess it's important, obviously, to do the work to get there, but also to have give yourself some permission if that big goal doesn't come together as exactly how you thought, that you have some other things that you've achieved along the way that you're going to be proud of and that will keep you going forward.
And I love that, that point, just that, again, you have to be flexible with your goals. If it doesn't necessarily turn out the way it did, you planned it, then I mean, you can't really dwell on that. And I think that's a point that we should elaborate on a little more, about getting out of your own head. Can you talk a little bit about, how that's helped you in both, running and in the newsroom?
Yeah, I mean, I think people can often, as managers and just leaders, being a person, you're always going to be, you're trying to figure out, well, how do other people see me? How am I being reflected in other things? And sometimes you can spend too much time, worrying about some of those things, and you're better off if goes back to an earlier mention of, kind of being centered on yourself, being comfortable with yourself, that you don't have to manage in exactly the same way someone else does or has, that you've come into to follow. That's why I asked at the beginning, just think about, what do you picture when you think of a runner? And it's probably, a thin person with long legs and not a lot of muscle tone because all they're doing is running. But if you go out on a race, whether it's a 5K or longer, you look around, there's people of all kinds, and they're all runners, and they all have their own, take and spin on things. You have to become and be comfortable with yourself and your own approach, and sort of find your own way, and not think, well, I'm not that runner I envisioned, or that person, I saw on the track, or the person crossing the finish line first. But, if you're a manager, if you manage, you're a manager. If you're a lead, you're a leader. You don't have to sort of fit yourself to other images, or worry that other people are saying, well, that's not how my editors used to function. You can carve your own way and finding a path forward.
Yes, great point. All right, so like I said, I know this is filled with quite a few gems, quite a few pieces of advice, and I thank you for that, Greg. Last few things I wanted to touch on a bit is we talked about how you can't run in the office. I mean, you can, but not in this sense, what we're referring to. So, can you talk a little more about the importance of getting out into the community?
Yeah, and the one thing I like use here as an example is, and Mackenzie knows about this one, and some of you may have come across it, but I wrote a story early on in the pandemic about running a solo marathon. And what had happened was, I was training with a friend of mine who had signed up for the Paris Marathon, and the Milwaukee Marathon was like a week apart. So if I told her I would train with her and then just do the Milwaukee Marathon, but that was scheduled for early April in 2020. And, it got canceled like so many other things and set aside. And I just decided that morning, I'm just gonna get out and run, see how far I can go. Didn't intend to run 26.2, but just sort of set out and found myself going to my old neighborhood, past the house where I grew up, around the city, into all these different areas, and just running with the release. I was going on furlough the next day, if you all remember that period we were going through, and it just reminded me the importance of, as an editor, just as a journalist at any point, or a leader, manager, you need to get out of the office, and including get out of the newsroom and into the community and see different things. When we're running, I often get tasked with, okay, we're running 10 miles, what's the route for today? And I always try to vary the route, because it's just going to see interesting things. You're going to see them in a new way. You might be, even if you go in the different direction of the same route, you see different things just by looking up and going. I mean, once I was on a different route, I was like, where did that restaurant come from? And I had never noticed it all the other times, but I'm coming from a different direction, and you did. I mean, and of course, it's the same too. If you get out of your office, if that's what you have, and out into the newsroom to hear from people, because you can't be a leader if you're not, listening to what people have to say and trying to understand what they're going through. And like I said, that applies at both levels. How can you write about and cover a community if you never get out and not only run through it or drive through it, but get out and meet people and talk to them and learn what their concerns are? Because that's the main point. And it relates to that one marathon in which I did it, and then I wrote a story about it. And then I went on furlough. So my boss, every time if I go on vacation now, he's like, and are you going to run a marathon and write a story before you do? And it's like, no, boss, this time I'm just going on vacation. But
yeah. Yes. And I think what you just said is even more important, again, in this virtual setting. A lot of times we can get comfortable, and we feel like we can just do it all from the living room, but there's still something to be said and something important about going out into the community and connecting with people, and seeing and experiencing places in your community. All of that definitely plays a difference in the news, and I appreciate you touching on that as well. Another gem is, the marathon doesn't owe you anything. It's quite simple. Staying humble. Let's talk a little bit about humility, Greg. Break this down. Break this gem down for us.
I'll start by telling a story. So I mentioned the calf cramps that I would get in, and I tell you, I've gone through every imaginable. I said, and I tell people you have it, and then it's like, oh, do you have enough potassium in you, or it's something different, or it's you didn't do enough cross training, or you didn't hydrate properly, or whatever. So for me, it's still this quest of like I've got to figure out how to run the perfect marathon because you just have to, right? So in a couple of years ago, I did the Lakefront Marathon in Milwaukee, which was early October. A different friend of mine, I guess I'm a sucker for helping other people train for marathons too, because she couldn't do that one. And she had a family thing come up, and she said she was going to do the Madison Marathon instead, and that was 5 weeks later. So I'll just stay trained up, and I'll run the Madison Marathon with you. And we're going through this race, and the Madison Marathon the route just sucks. I mean, it's a beautiful route, but at about mile 10, you get to Observatory Hill. Okay, at mile 10, and everything, the capital at the end is on a hill that you have to go up. And I had one point where, I'll say, preface, side note, I've been getting better at this and figuring out how to hydrate properly and do all these things. So we're running this difficult route, and all the way it goes to the run the mile year, and I kept thinking, I'm not having these calf cramps. They're not, you can sort of sense when they're coming. I'm like, this is going great. I'm going to get there. And literally just when I said, like, I'm going to make it through this marathon without getting the calf cramps, at the mile 26 marker, so I'm 0.2, I'm about 2 blocks away from the finish, I got the calf cramps, and it was sort of like just this reminder that the marathon gods aren't through with me yet. They have a sense of humor, apparently, even if I didn't find it funny in the moment. But it's sort of like, you have to stay humble because you can still put in all of the work. I had done all the training, I had done the hydrating, and we took greater care and slowed the pace earlier and all these different things, and it still didn't quite work. And that's where it's sort of, you can't get overconfident in what you're doing. You can't be cocky. You can't go into it thinking, boy, I'm due for a good marathon because I've had 5 bad ones. You can still have problems in that one, and you still have to be alert and prepared and ready for it. And that's what I mean when people say the marathon doesn't know anything. It's not like, it's like, I've done all this. Well, dang it, if I don't have this work perfectly on this project or this goal, I'm due. I mean, you're only due if you put in all the work and do everything properly. And even then, it may not come to pass exactly the way you envision, but that's where you have the A, B, and C goals and things like that to try to adapt and grow. And that goes to, slow progress is still progress and all these other things that we talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what, Greg, if you didn't motivate someone to run a marathon, I know you definitely motivated them in their newsrooms. So thank you for going through this presentation with me. It looks like we finished a bit earlier than we had imagined. So I'm not sure if anyone had any questions for Greg at this point, or I know there was a few things in the chat, but I wanted to leave room at the end just in case.
Let's ask Max Gersh if he's still with us. He made a point about imposter syndrome that Greg had talked about early on. Max, are you still with us?
Yeah. My camera not turning on?
It might be.
There I am. I exist now. So I think a lot of us, if anybody says they haven't experienced or don't continually experience imposter syndrome, they're probably lying. And Greg, I love like what you said about, kind of, if you're a runner, if you're a marathoner, you're a marathoner. If you're a leader, you're a leader. You are put in this position because somebody wants you to do things the way you do them. You were trusted to not be the person before you, not to do it like the person next to you, but to do it the way you do it. And that's why we were all put in these positions. One of my really close friends was hired pretty young to be an editor, photo editor at the New York Times. And he walks into that newsroom for the first time and he's terrified. He's around all these people that are, legends in the field, and he's just nervous. And this Bernie Mac clip played in the back of his head where he's on stage and he looks out at the crowd and says, "I'm not afraid of you, MFers." And that's what goes through his head when he walked in there. He's like, I still have to, they hired me to speak my voice, to raise my concerns, to do these things because they wanted my insight. So I can't be afraid of them. And we're always going to have imposter syndrome. But if we shift the narrative in our head about what that is, rather than being something that holds us down, but rather something to challenge us to become better versions of ourselves, know that the people around us already trust us and support us, and we can just become better versions of that. That's the way to do that. And that's the way we can all continue to grow and thrive in our roles.
Yeah, I think those are great observations. I mean, like I said, and it's tough when you start. I mean, I didn't envision myself. I mean, when I was a reporter, which I was for many, many years, I envisioned myself always being a reporter. And reporters who sat next to me in our little cluster in our old newsroom would say that I was famous for every time I got some the manager gave me something that I thought was a dumb idea. I'd be like, what happens when you get to be a manager? Do they get in? Do they lobotomize you or something, and you forget completely how to be a reporter? And I would go on to these rants, and then I became an editor and a manager, and it was sort of like, okay, well now I've got to, was filling ultimately the shoes of a very strong projects editor, Mark Katches, who had left us for another place, stepping in on some very important projects, and you find yourself in your head as you go through things like, well, what would someone else do? What would what's the right way to do that? And the key, I think, gets back to being, authenticity, and that you're not going to be that other person, but you can be yourself and try to use that to your advantage. That, I mean, my demeanor is very different, I think, than Mark Katches's was. I don't know if anyone knows him. I know Raquel does, obviously, on this call, and Aaron Coy and some others. But you can be as effective in your own, approach and with your own way. And I think the one thing just to remember is when I say if you run, you're a runner, that's true. It doesn't mean you're a good runner or an experienced runner. You still can learn from other people and go through training and programs like this and keep your mind open, to learn and not feel like, the worst thing you can do is you've got the title, I'm the editor, and you're working with a reporter on a story, and you say, well, it's my way because I'm the editor, right? That I say it should be that way, and why won't people just accept that I'm the editor? And it's like you have to understand that, you have to work with that reporter and understand how they're perceiving you and other things. So there's a lot of, everyone can grow. You can continue to grow even after many years in those roles, and keep trying to perfect it.
That's great.
Can I jump in and just say really quick, since I am here and I did witness Greg go through that transformation, what an amazing job he did. It was remarkable, because we were in the middle of a couple of big projects, and I mean, the way he just stepped in, I tell everybody all the time, it just blows my mind, because I think there was some uncertainty and fear among staff members, like, how is this going to be? You've worked with this person for a long time and you've known them in a particular role, and now here he is. And I mean, nobody could have done a better job. I mean, it was just amazing how smoothly you transitioned and how we felt total confidence in your hands. I mean, it's just been amazing. I tell everybody that all the time, because I get blown away by it. And I think it was a lot about you listened, and you're so respectful. And you didn't come in with a heavy hand, like what you were just saying, like, you have to listen to me because I'm the editor. You genuinely were interested in collaborating and making the best projects out there. And so that just really shone through to all of us, and has made you just amazing. And we love having the opportunity to work with you. So Just adding that little bit.
Okay.
That's lovely. We'll see how well Greg takes that.
Yeah, I'll leave the small bills on your desk, Raquel. So.
If you, Greg, if you feel you need to counterweight the compliment with being gently chastised, Erin can knock you for not coming outside and picking up the hot chocolate out front of her house.
My complaint is usually that it's not there, but if it's there now and I'm forgetting about it, now I'll know better.
No.
Erin
I have
lives
to.
about. She lives just south of me, so I pass it all the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
You pass it, you don't stop.
That's true.
Hey, guys.
I'll have to stop.
This is Nick Garcia over in Des Moines. And on that note, I'm wondering if I could pop in a question about wanting to work collaboratively, but also sometimes just needing to be an editor. And one of the things that I'm working with, in particular, one reporter, is assuring that I have trust in his news judgment, but also trying to make sure that he has trust in my news judgment. And sometimes when I say we need to do a story, just having him kind of do a story. Again, I know that, and not making sure everything is a fight. And I'm wondering how gone about knowing that you're here for collaboration, and sometimes the decision just has to be made, and you're the person to do that. Knowing that I want the conversations, and I want, those big picture, that collaboration, and sometimes we just have to make a decision. That's my job. How do you straddle that?
Yeah, it's a difficult one for certain, and I don't know many people who've truly mastered that. I think a lot of it starts if you're starting with a listening posture and a humble posture, and to say, okay, well, why did you write it that way, or why do you think that's the more important story, and to get them into a more of a conversation of like, well, there are these other priorities too that we have to deal with. Is there a way we can achieve, both things? Or if you do this right now and setting this back for a week or a day or whatever, does that cause a problem? I think some of it is to make sure you're engaging the person in the dialogue so so you understand where they're coming from. And I'm thinking sometimes in the real specific circumstance of, if you're editing someone's story. When I was a reporter, and some of my former editors will tell you, they didn't like editing. They liked editing my stories because they came in clean and were strong, but they were hard to edit in the sense that if they moved a paragraph somewhere, they'd go, oh shoot, well that just undid all these other things. And I would say my view is, if you're going to make that change, you should have a good reason for why you're doing that. The same way I should have a good reason for why I wrote it that way. And I always would try with the reporters to engage them to say, well, what about that approach? Why are you trying to do that? Or here's one way you could do it different. Why don't you come back with a different solution? And sometimes it's just putting it on the reporter to say, okay, well, we've got these three priorities, tell me how you would want to tackle it. And then maybe you can, guide them, drag them, cajole them, nudge them, whatever you need to do to get them into a different place. I would say in editing that, the tie goes to the reporter. So it's sort of like, if we both made a good case for this thing, and we just have a different of opinion on what the right word is or the structure or whatever at that paragraph, ultimately, if you both made a strong position and they're both reasonable ones, you got to give the reporter something, right? You can't always be like that. You don't want to create a winner or loser posture with the reporter. You want to create more of a, we're in this together and let's all try to work our way through whatever the challenge is. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but those are just some thoughts that come to mind.
And the Journal Sentinel is long been remembered as known as a reporter-focused, reporter-centric culture. I think of you guys like the Lakers. LeBron James won the NBA championship with the Lakers. I think they fired the coach. I didn't even know who the coach is, right? And that's kind of, to me, the reporter centricity there. Brenna's got her hand up.
Hey, Greg, I have a question about special projects. As you bring a team together for a long-term project, what would you say are some of the structures or tactics you use in all of your projects to make sure they're set up for success?
Yeah, that's a great question. I just add quickly before I forget about it on, what Mackenzie was saying there too, is that if we've done a good job on projects and things, I'm not visible as the editor, right? Because I want the reporters, and not just the reporters, the photojournalists and the graphic designers and the digital designers and everyone else front and center on that. And my hand you shouldn't be able to look at that project and go, well, that was one that Greg edited because it sounds like Greg. Okay, it's got to sound like the reporter and that team, and they need to be at the center of it. And in that same vein, when I said earlier, projects are a team sport. To make any of these projects go well, you need to get everybody, I think, at the table initially to at least hear ideas and get opinions and learn what can be done. And then you have to give everybody on that team time to do their best work. And what is often a problem I see just in projects in general is if you say we've got the reporters working over here, maybe the photographers coming in to, shoot pictures at various points, but they don't feel like a full-fledged member of the team. And then over here, you then give it to somebody else and say, now make it look good, or now why didn't we have the great photos from it? So if you start with everybody around the table and put that team together, and then let them function as a team because they have different viewpoints. And sometimes it's hard for reporters and things, depending on the culture in the newsroom as you're starting to build that. But over time, you see to me, that's the most critical thing to success. There's a whole host of, I've got all sorts of things from past conferences and things on how to do it and tip sheets, and I'm happy if anyone is interested I can send those along and how we do it. But I mean, one of the Pulitzer Prizes we won here for 1 in a Billion, the team on that won it for explanatory reporting wasn't just the reporter or the reporter and the photographer. It was the reporter and the photographer and the graphic artist and the digital designer who all collectively worked to pull this together in a way that could communicate effectively to the readers. And I was, adamant as we were going through to say, well, who should be named on this entry, that they all should be, because the explanatory part wasn't just the words, it was the visuals and how it came together and how you functioned when you went through the story and had great videos and other things with it. And that's when people in the newsroom see that, they're going to buy into it more, I think, than I'm here in the service department as the photographer, or I'm the copy editor, I get it at the very end, and it's just diminishing their work because you're telling them that you can just do this at the very end. But what if you have a big question that might have shaped the reporting, and you should be involved earlier? Yeah.
Well, I think we're at 59 minutes. Maybe we should just leave it at there with our thanks to Greg for his story and his experiences. And by the way, read the story. I put it in the chat. It's one of the best pieces of journalism that I've read over the last couple of years. Greg's heard me say that before. Super inspiring. And I'd also like to thank Tia Levon. Wonderful preparation, masterful job, kind of helping us work our way through this analogy and understand all different parts of it. So thanks for doing a great job with that. And thank you all for coming. So I know an hour is a lot to give up, but I hope you found it valuable, and we'll be back with you soon. Take care, everybody.
All right. Yeah. Good luck, everybody. Take care.